Hey guys, in today's video, I bring you an unbelievable and transformative story. Let's meet Enoch Thorne, a pastor from a small town in Colorado, who, after a crisis of faith, embarked on a spiritual journey in the Rocky Mountains and literally faced death. What he saw on the other side will challenge everything you've ever heard about heaven, divine love, and the true nature of the afterlife. So before we start, leave your like, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any content like this, and activate the bell to receive all notifications. Now, get ready for an intense experience, full of revelations and chills. My name is Enoch Thorne. If you saw me walking the streets of Boulder, Colorado in 1980, you would probably recognize me as the pastor of that little red brick church on the corner of 4th Avenue. For years, my life was dedicated to ministry, preaching about God's love, offering comfort to those who were suffering, and mentoring young people who were searching for purpose. Each Sunday, the echo of my words filled the church hall, and the voices of the congregation joined in songs of praise. But inside me, there was only silence. The emptiness began as a subtle, almost imperceptible doubt. I read the scriptures and, instead of inspiration, I felt only the weight of repeated words. I prayed, but my prayers seemed to rise only to the ceiling, hitting back on my forehead like cold rain. Little by little, what was once an unshakable faith became a facade. I found myself preaching about divine love while my own soul was dry and thirsty. "Enoch, are you okay?" Abigail, my wife, would ask whenever I found myself standing on the porch, looking up at the night sky as if waiting for God to answer me from there. "You seem distant." "I'm fine," I lied, offering a weak smile. "Just tired." But it wasn't physical tiredness. It was as if my soul was exhausted. I watched my church members with envy at the simplicity of their beliefs, the certainty that their prayers were heard. I was their guide, but I felt lost, leading them down a path that I didn't see myself. One day, after a service, Jonathan Brooks, a young man who always sat in the back row, approached me. "Pastor, do you think God hears us, even when we don't feel anything? When everything seems empty?" The question hit me like a blow. "Yes, Jonathan," I replied, my voice lower than I would have liked. "I think so." But at that moment, the truth was that I didn't know. This crisis was not just a passing shadow, it was an abyss, and I was on the edge of it, about to fall. Something needed to change, and I knew, deep down in my being, that the answer was not within the four walls of that church. That summer of 1980, I made the most difficult decision of my life, to walk away from the church. For someone whose identity was so deeply rooted in the role of pastor, admitting I needed a break felt like ripping away a part of myself. When I announced to the congregation that I would be taking a sabbatical, the reactions were mixed. Some faces showed understanding, but many expressed confusion and even disappointment. "But, Pastor, who will lead our Bible studies?" asked Mrs. Jenkins, an elderly woman who rarely missed a church meeting. "Are you in good health?" another asked, almost hoping that my absence had a physical justification, something tangible and easy to accept. I tried to explain that I needed time to reconnect with God, but the words felt empty. For many, a pastor who does not feel the divine presence was like a captain who abandons ship in the middle of a storm. And in a way, that's exactly what I was doing. At home, Abigail tried to be understanding, but I saw the worry in her eyes. "Are you sure about this, Enoch?" She held my hand tightly. "Stepping away now could do more harm than good. I can't go on like this, Abby. I need to find something real. I can't keep preaching something I don't feel." She sighed, her hands cold against mine. "Then go, but come back to me." It was Caleb Marlowe who planted the idea of the Rocky Mountain expedition. One summer afternoon, as we drank coffee on his porch, he suggested, "Nature has a way of silencing the noise within. Maybe that's what you need." Caleb was a practical man, but there was a quiet spirituality to his way of life. For him, God was in the wind that blew through the trees, in the waters of the rivers, in the silence of the mountains. His invitation was a calling. Something inside me, a spark that had long been extinguished, was rekindled. So, I started the preparations. Caleb taught me basic survival skills: how to use a compass, pitch a tent in a strong wind, build a fire with damp wood. For someone who had always lived in the comfort of Scripture, each practical lesson was a shock, but also a release. When the day came to leave, I hugged Abigail on the doorstep. "I'll be back, I promise." "I know," she whispered, but her eyes said something else. Perhaps she knew, even before I did, that the Enoch that left would never return the same. The first days on the trail were a mix of wonder and exhaustion. The Rocky Mountains rose around us like sleeping giants, their slopes covered in dense forests and peaks covered in eternal snow. The air was fresh. Each breath seemed to clear not only my lungs, but also some of the fog that shrouded my soul. Caleb was a calm guide. He spoke little, allowing silence to fill the spaces between us. When he spoke, his words were soft, almost like a prayer. "Listen to the wind, Enoch. It carries ancient stories. Sometimes we need to be silent to hear them." I tried to absorb that wisdom. We walked along narrow trails, crossed icy streams, climbed rocks that challenged my body accustomed only to intellectual effort. Every muscle ached. My hands felt rough and calloused, but somehow I felt more real, more present than I had in years. During the nights, we set up camp in clearings protected by the embrace of the trees. The fire crackled, the orange heat dancing against the cool blue of twilight. I lay under a star-studded sky, each point of light seeming like a promise. But even there, surrounded by nature, the emptiness still persisted. My mind wandered, bringing back the questions I tried to leave behind. "Do you ever doubt everything, Caleb?" I asked one night, as the fire cast shadows across our faces. "Yes," he replied without hesitation. "But doubt is not the end of faith, Enoch. Sometimes it is the beginning." His words stayed with me. I wanted them to be true, but with every step I took, I felt like I was moving further away from what I knew, and not necessarily getting closer to what I was looking for. On the 7th day, the weather began to change. Clouds gathered on the horizon, heavy and dark. Caleb frowned, eyes scanning the sky. "We need to get down, now." The tone of his voice sent an unexpected chill down my spine. We grabbed the essentials, hurriedly packed up camp, and began the descent. But the mountain had other plans for us. The storm arrived like a wall of wind and snow, enveloping us in a whirlwind of ice and fear. The storm broke upon us with indomitable fury. The wind howled, pushing us as if we were dry leaves in the midst of the gale. Snowflakes turned into needles of ice, cutting into exposed skin and obscuring our vision. Each step became a battle, my feet sinking into the snow as the cold seeped into my bones. "Hold on tight, Enoch," Caleb shouted, his voice nearly swallowed by the roar of the storm. His hands held the rope that united us, a security link that seemed fragile in the face of the force of nature. With every meter descended, the mountain became more treacherous. The slippery rocks hid beneath a layer of ice, and the cliffs loomed like menacing shadows around us. The entire world had become a blur of white and gray, and the only fixed point was the figure of Caleb, who was struggling to find a safe path. Suddenly, the rope got stuck. Caleb tried to free her, but she was trapped between two rocks, frozen and unyielding. "We can't go down here," he said, his voice now lower, filled with concern. "We'll have to wait, in the middle of a storm." At that moment, despair began to creep in like the cold. My hands were numb, my fingers were stiff, my breath came in thick clouds, but each puff seemed less effective at warming my body. "Enoch, stay awake," Caleb insisted. "Talk to me. Tell me about Abigail." I tried. I talked about the way she set the dinner table, always placing fresh flowers in a small vase, about how she sang softly while washing the dishes, a melody only she seemed to know. But as I spoke, my voice faded, like a candle in the wind. The tiredness was irresistible. I lay down in the snow, the feeling of ice against my skin no longer uncomfortable. In fact, it was welcoming. I felt my eyes closing, the sound of the storm receding, and a strange peace began to wash over me. "Enoch, no, stay with me." Caleb's voice seemed to come from far away, almost like an echo, but I was already sliding to another place, a place where the cold no longer existed, where the weight of my body disappeared, where the struggle finally ceased. The transition was like a sigh. One moment I was lying in the snow, the world enveloped in a relentless storm, and the next moment, all was silence. The feeling was like floating in warm water, where there was no pain, cold, or any discomfort. My consciousness expanded, and the weight of my body felt like it was left behind. All around me was only darkness, but it wasn't a frightening emptiness. It was a welcoming darkness, like a mother's womb, a pause between one heartbeat and another. The peace was so deep that I almost forgot who I was, where I had come from. It was as if all my worries, doubts, and fears had been dissolved, leaving only a pure essence of my being. And then, the light appeared. At first it was just a tiny speck in the distance, but it quickly grew, expanding until it completely enveloped me. The light was not just a glow, but a presence. I didn't see shapes or faces, but I felt something there, an intelligence, an awareness, an unconditional love. There were no words, but I heard, or perhaps just felt, a message reverberating within me. You are safe. You are loved. The feeling of unity was overwhelming. I wasn't just Enoch Thorne, pastor of a small town in Colorado. I was part of something much bigger, like a drop finally meeting the ocean. Time no longer has meaning. There was no before or after, just now, an eternal now, where every moment was filled with the purest and absolute peace. I realized that that light was not only around me, but also within me. It was as if my very essence was made of the same substance as the light, as if I had always been a part of it, but only now could I remember it. The certainty that I was loved did not depend on my actions, nor on my beliefs. It was an unconditional, deep and unchanging love. In this state, the questions that previously tormented me disappeared. There was no longer a need to understand, justify, or prove anything. I was enough. I was complete. And then, a new sensation began to emerge, like a gentle current taking me to a deeper place where revelations awaited, where the true purpose of this experience would begin to unfold. As I floated in that light, I began to feel as if a curtain was being pulled back before me. My memories unfolded, not just as images, but as living, pulsating experiences. I didn't just see the moments of my life, I relived them, feeling every emotion and every consequence of my actions. It all started in my childhood. I found myself running through the fields around Boulder, my feet bare on the damp grass. I felt my mother's embrace, her love wrapping around me like a warm blanket on a cold night. I experienced again the innocent joy of sharing my lunch with a classmate who had forgotten his. Each act of kindness seemed to shine, little sparks of light spreading around me. But then, the failures came. I relived times when, as a pastor, I spoke arrogantly, believing my role placed me in a superior position. I felt the pain of the people I hurt without realizing it, especially the times I judged someone in the name of faith, without offering the compassion I preached. One particular scene hit me hard. A young woman named Sarah, who came to me seeking comfort after a tragic loss. At the time, I offered ready-made answers, Bible verses that seemed more like a shield for my own insecurity than a true relief from his pain. Now, I felt the emptiness she experienced, the disappointment my words caused. The light didn't judge me, but allowed me to see and feel everything with painful clarity. For every good deed, there was a surge of warmth and love. For every failure, a pang of sadness, not as a punishment, but as a call to understanding. It was as if every moment of my life was a note in a larger melody, and now I could hear not just the individual notes, but the entire song. I understood that heaven was not a physical place, but a state of being where love and acceptance prevailed. And the most impressive thing, everyone was already part of this heaven. It did not matter whether someone was a devotee or an unbeliever, a saint or a sinner. Divine love was available to everyone, because everyone carried this light within themselves. It was as if the entire universe was a tapestry of light, and each of us was an essential thread, contributing to the whole. Time didn't exist there. I could have lived forever in that state. But then the light began to show me something more. A vision of Earth appeared before me, not just as a planet, but as a living, pulsating, connected being. I saw people as little sparks of light, some shining brightly, others obscured by a fog of fear, pain, and anger. And I realized how every small act of kindness could dispel that darkness, creating explosions of light that spread across the world. The message was clear. True heaven was not a destination to be reached, but a reality to be experienced here and now. And at that moment, I began to understand that my journey was not over yet. As I remained enveloped in that divine light, a choice began to form before me. There were no words, but the message was clear. I could remain there, in eternal peace and union with divine love, or I could return to the physical world. The choice was mine. The idea of staying was incredibly tempting. There was no pain, There was no fear, just love, acceptance, and a sense of fulfillment I had never experienced. It seemed that if I stayed, all my longings and doubts would be dissolved forever. I would become part of that light, a drop melting into the ocean, never again having to face the weight of human existence. But then, images started to form around me. I saw Abigail's face, her eyes teary, sitting on the edge of the empty bed, holding my pillow to her chest. I saw my elderly parents receiving the news that their only son had been taken by the mountains. And I saw Caleb, his body huddled against the cold, his hands rubbing mine, his hoarse voice whispering prayers as he tried to keep me alive. Human love, with all its fragility and imperfection, called me back. That same love that I had felt as a spark in childhood. That same love that I had preached so many times, but that I now understood in all its depth. It was not an idealized love, but a real love, full of pain, sacrifice, and yet the most powerful force in the world. The choice became clear. I could not remain in the light while those I loved suffered in my absence. I needed to come back, not just for them, but because now I carried a truth that needed to be shared, a truth that went beyond any dogma or religion, a message that heaven was not a destination, but a reality we could experience by living in love and acceptance. With this decision, the light began to retract. Absolute peace was replaced by increasing pressure. I felt like my consciousness was being squeezed, forced to fit into a container that was too small. Lightness gave way to weight, freedom to limitation. And then, the pain returned, tearing through me as if I were walking through a narrow, rough portal. There I was, back in my body, and the cold hit me like a blade. My lungs burned. Each breath was a colossal effort. I heard a distant voice, almost muffled by the storm. Enoch, Enoch, stay with me. It was Caleb, and I was alive. The pain was overwhelming. Returning to my body was like being shoved into a tight box, where every inch of skin, every bone and muscle seemed to protest against life. My lungs burned as I breathed in the frigid air, and the cold bit my skin, pulling me back to the unforgiving reality of the mountain. Enoch, Enoch, look at me. Caleb's voice was hoarse, broken with exhaustion and desperation. His hands rubbed my shoulders, his warmth trying to pull me from the abyss of freezing. You're back. Thank God you're back. I tried to speak, but my voice wouldn't come out. My lips were numb. My teeth were grinding uncontrollably. Everything around me was a mess of snow, rocks, and Caleb's scarred face. I could see the tears frozen on her cheeks, her eyes red and sunken. He hadn't given up on me, and in that moment, I realized that my decision to return had been guided by love, not just divine love but human love, so real and palpable. Rescue arrived hours later. I don't remember much. Fragments of memory, the sound of the helicopter, muffled voices, hands lifting me onto a stretcher. The heat of the helicopter cabin was both a relief and torture. My skin felt like it was burning as the blood began to circulate again. I remember Caleb holding my hand, his thumb tracing slow circles on my skin, as if that small gesture could ensure I wouldn't slip back into the darkness. The hospital was a new challenge. My body needed to recover from the shock, the hypothermia, the hunger. I spent weeks lying down, unable to move without help. But my mind, my soul, these were more alive than ever. As nurses came in and out of the room, bringing medicine and encouraging me to eat, I felt like someone carrying a secret so big that sometimes it felt like I would explode if I didn't tell it. Abigail came every day. At first, his expression was a mix of relief and caution. She didn't know what I had experienced, but she felt that something in me had changed. She held my hand, read passages from the Bible in a low voice, but I could tell she was waiting for me to say something that explained why I had left as a pastor and returned, different. Enoch, you're here, but you're not, she whispered one night. What happened to you? I didn't have enough words, not yet, but I knew that as soon as I was strong enough, I would tell you, not just for her, but for anyone who would listen, because what I had experienced was more than a vision, more than a mystical experience. It was a truth that could change lives. When I was finally released from the hospital, the world felt different. The streets of Boulder were exactly as I remembered, but my perceptions had changed. Every leaf in the wind, every smile from a child, every hug exchanged between friends carried an intensity that I hadn't noticed before. It was as if I saw the divine spark in everything and everyone. Returning to church, however, was more challenging. The red brick walls that once brought me comfort now seemed too narrow to contain what I needed to share. The first Sunday after my return, the church was packed. People came not only to hear the word of God, but to hear what had happened to me. Rumors had spread. Some said I had seen heaven. Others believed I had faced hell. The truth was much more complex. I walked up to the pulpit, my hands shaking slightly. The eyes of Abigail, sitting in the front row, gave me strength. Beside me, Caleb watched with an expression that mixed pride and curiosity. I took a deep breath, letting the silence linger before speaking. "My brothers and sisters," I began, my voice hoarse. "During my time in the mountains, I did not find the heaven of streets of gold or the gates of pearls. I did not find saints or angels playing harps. But what I did find was love, a love so deep and inclusive that it made me understand that heaven is not a place we arrive at. Heaven is a state of being." The murmur started in the back rows and spread throughout the room. Some faces closed, expressions of skepticism and even displeasure appeared. But I continued. During my experience, I saw that each of us carries a divine light. No matter our religion, our flaws, or our doubts, God's love is not a reward for good behavior. It is our essence, and our mission is not to judge or condemn, but to help ignite that light in others. There was a dense silence, followed by the voice of Jonathan Brooks. "But, Pastor, does that mean we don't need to follow the commandments? That everything is permitted?" "No, Jonathan," I replied. "It means that when we live with a heart full of love, we naturally seek to do good, not out of fear of punishment or hope of reward, but because love transforms us." After the service, some people left without speaking to me. I knew that for many, my message was a departure from everything they believed. But other people stayed. Abigail hugged me, her body shaking. "Now I understand," she said. "I see the change in you, and I want to be part of it." From that day on, I began preaching a more inclusive message. We talked about the divine love present in everyone, about how small acts of kindness could light up the world. It was no longer just a church. It was a meeting point for those seeking a more authentic spirituality, free from dogma. And little by little, our little community grew, not in number, but in depth. People no longer came just to listen, but to share. Each testimony, each confession, each act of compassion was a spark that lit others. I finally felt at home, not because I was in a church, but because I had found heaven within myself and was helping others find it too. The years that followed were a journey of their own. The small red brick church became more than a worship space. It was a refuge for lost souls, a shelter for those seeking answers, and a home for those who just needed acceptance. Our congregation went from being just a group of believers to a vibrant community where stories were shared without fear of judgment. I stopped being the pastor who offered ready-made answers. Instead, I became a conversation facilitator. On Sundays, the pulpit was shared. Jonathan Brooks, who once sought approval from rigid doctrines, now led a group of young people, helping them find their own spiritual connections. Abigail, my wife, organized prayer circles, but also listening circles, where people could talk freely about their doubts and fears. My message has evolved. I talked less about heaven as a distant place and more about heaven as a state of being. I told my near-death experience not as a mystical vision, but as a practical revelation. Divine love was within our reach here and now. Every act of kindness was a spark of the divine. Every gesture of compassion, an open door to paradise. Of course, not everyone accepted this change. Some traditional church members have walked away. I would see them occasionally on the streets of Boulder, their expressions reserved, a restrained wave. There was no resentment on my part. I knew that each person's spiritual journey followed their own path, and that the love I had experienced did not force anyone. It only welcomed them. What surprised me were the people who came from far away. Someone would hear my story, tell a friend, and soon we would have visitors from other cities, even other states. They came not because I promised miracles, but because I offered a message of acceptance. It didn't matter if they were religious or not, whether they followed the Bible, the Quran, or any holy book. I welcomed them with the same love I felt in the light, a love that said, "You are loved. You are enough." I felt at peace, Not a passive peace, but an active peace, where each day was a new opportunity to share the light I had experienced. And, as I shared, I realized that my own light was growing stronger. The emptiness that once tormented me had been filled, not by definitive answers, but by acceptance of the divine mystery that permeated all things. Decades passed. My hair turned gray. My hands acquired the tremor of age, but my soul remained young. I continued talking, listening, hugging those who arrived. I knew that when my time finally came, I would not fear, because I had already experienced heaven. I already knew that the end was just a new beginning, and love, that eternal love, would be there, waiting for me and for all of us. If you like this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time,